Hi, thanks for joining us today at Compliance Testing. We're going to go over Title 47 of the Code of Federal Regulations in Part 15. We are compliance testing. We're an ISO 17025 and ISO 17065 test measurement and certification lab based out here in Arizona. We serve global markets, but obviously, especially in Arizona, it seems like we're opening a new semiconductor or electric vehicle factory every day. So definitely happy to serve our local markets as well as global. We do a lot of work as an agent on behalf of agencies like the FCC, Canada, European Union, UKCA, and we do testing for EMC, RF, product safety certifications. We are also a TCB, and we specialize in ISSI, CSSI field testing as well. Joining me today is AZ Fazal, one of our EMC test engineers. Welcome, AZ. How are you doing?
Brad, I'm doing well. Hello, everyone.
Thanks for joining us today. Here are our objectives. AZ, if you want to go over them.
Yes, so our objectives for today, we'll cover what does FCC compliant mean? What is Title 47 CFR Part 15? What is a Part 15 device? What is FCC Class A emission? And what is FCC Part 15B?
And we want to first tell our audience who this content is for before you invest your time. This is targeted towards electronic device manufacturers, especially those who may manufacture IoT or IIoT devices, smart appliances, smart pet devices, smart home devices like smart lighting, smart locks, smart city equipment as well. In addition to smart wearable tech or wearables, we're all familiar with smart watches, but also athletic gear, sensors, heart rate sensors. And the type of industries would include agriculture, automotive, electrical or electronic vehicle components, forestry, logistics, manufacturing, med tech, medical devices like ventilators, things like that, mining, oil and gas, robotics, automated manufacturing, SATCOM, and then also telecom. So if you're in those industries, if you're a product designer or anybody involved in creating any of those devices, this is for you. So let's start with our first question, AZ. What does FCC compliant mean?
Very good question. So when you think of FCC, you see a logo everywhere for FCC. It's on your phone chargers, on your phones, it's on your smart wearable devices, it's on your electronics that you own at home, it's probably on your heater, on your humidifiers if you have it. That logo is basically on everything. And what an FCC compliant device is one that follows the rules and regulations that the FCC sets forth. Now, people wonder like what is exactly the FCC? People have heard of it. Well, FCC, as my Gen Y fellow Gen Yers know, like from the Eminem song, FCC won't let me be. Well, FCC stands for Federal Communication Commissions, and they're the governing body that govern the different RF and EMI interferences that can come about from different electronic devices. So they're the regulating bodies, basically who they are.
So these things are kind of called standards, or known as standards or conformance standards. Is that right?
Yes, Brad.
All right, great. So now that you explained that, let's dig a little bit deeper and go down a level. What is Title 47 CFR Part 15?
Again, another good question. So first, what is CFR? CFR stands for Code of Federal Regulations, again governed by the FCC. And in that Code of Federal Regulations, you have different titles that the FCC governs. Title 7 being for telecommunication devices, such as your electronics, your TVs, your LTE towers. That's what's governed under Title 47. Now, under Title 47, there are different parts as well. So, like we're talking about Part 15, that's for your electronic devices. Part 18 is for your microwaves. Part 74 is for your TV transmitters. So you also have different parts under that Title 47. So like I was saying, Part 15 is within Title 47, and that's basically for your consumer electronics to make sure that there aren't any unwanted interferences or your spurious emissions.
Okay, and what exactly does spurious emissions mean?
Okay. So spurious emissions is emissions that you're not planning to use one bit. Like if you have your phone, right? Or if you have your router uses a frequency an intentional radio at 2.4 gigahertz. You want that to be there. But let's say your router did something at 550 megahertz, right?
Uh-oh.
Well, it's not necessarily, you don't want that to happen. So again, that's your spurious emissions, or you could have something at 750 megahertz. That's also your unwanted emission because it's in frequency that you're not planning to use one bit.
Okay, so it sounds like nearly every electronic device sold in the United States radiates unintentional emissions and needs to fall under and comply with Part 15 before it can be advertised or sold in the United States market. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, wow. So that's a wide range of devices. So that takes us to what is a Part 15 device?
Okay, so like I said, Part 15 device is anything that falls under the FCC Code of Federal Regulations, Title 47. And as you mentioned, and as I mentioned, that these are unlicensed electronics.
So what does
And
that mean? What does unlicensed versus licensed mean?
okay, so unlicensed basically for your consumer electronics. License is basically used by commercial or industry, like your TV transmitters, right? They're used by different industries, and they have to be regulated differently than your unlicensed devices, because it's easier. Because there can be more interference because there's more consumers, hence there's more interference, and hence they're in unlicensed devices versus your licensed devices.
Okay, great. So let's get back to what is a Part 15 device?
Okay, like I was saying, these are unlicensed electronics, which need to make sure that that they're following regulations and protocols and not interfering with other devices. So like for me, right? One time, I had blinds, and I also had a TV for TV, right? So
Oh,
I
like
started to use
electronic
my
blinds?
yeah, electronic blinds. So I used my TV remote to, turn on the TV, and it wasn't working. So I don't know what's going on. And I found out later, oh, it's turning on my blinds because, well, guess what? They both have it's interfering. It's probably unwanted signal that's high enough that was interfering with the signal I was trying to get from my TV remote to my TV.
Okay, so back when I was a kid and we used to leave the house and hit the garage door opener and the TV would go off, that has something to do with that?
Oh yes, you want to make sure that that doesn't really happen.
Okay, so under Part 15, it sounds like everybody who designs a device is kind of entitled to have their device work as it should without interference from somebody else's device and vice versa. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right, great. So moving on to the next topic, what's the difference between Part A and Part B under Part 15 devices?
Okay, so Part A or Part B, and I like to call Class A, Class B. So they are regulated differently as well. So Class A device is anything that is for industrial commercial use, and Class B is for residential use, with consumers like us do at home.
Okay, so Class A, and calling them class versus Part B, I can understand where that can get confusing. So Class A, Class B devices, it sounds like Class A devices are meant for industrial, commercial use, like in oil and gas or big manufacturing equipment, things like that, used mostly for business use. And then Part B, or Class B, better said, is intended for residential or consumer use, things that we would use on a day-to-day basis outside of work at our homes in leisure. Does that sound right?
That sounds absolutely correct.
Okay, great. And then what is FCC Class A emission?
Okay, so as we were talking about previously, that there are two different types of classes: Class B being for residential, Class A being for industrial and commercial. So Class A emissions is basically a type of interference or radiation that is produced by your mentioned Class A device. Now, as opposed to Class B device, right? Class A devices are meant for your industry and commercial use, as we mentioned, and they include, your heavy machinery such as your forklifts, your big generators, your basically anything that's a complex equipment that's meant to be used in manufacturing, hospitals, even grocery stores. So those are what Class A devices are, Class A emission devices or Class A emissions.
Okay. So then what's more stringent? What's harder to pass? Is it Class A or Class B?
Okay, so Class B would be more stringent to pass, as like I said, Class B is residential, Class A is commercial industrial. So with Class B, being in residential, you have, let's say at your home and there's surrounding homes, right? And you're using something, your electronic device. Well, we don't want that to interfere with other people's electronic devices or whatever that they're using for their electronics. As opposed with Class A, which is less stringent, because now you're in like a bigger environment, and you actually need some signals and emissions to actually reach the next person. Let's say you have a Wi-Fi router, right? You actually, and again, that would fall under intentional, but versus what you need at home and versus what you need at a supermarket or in, like, let's say Walmart, that's something different. However, that now, since Class B is more stringent, anything that is Class B can be used for Class A, because if they meet Class B limits, they're definitely going to meet your Class A limits.
Okay, so it sounds like the standards for devices used for residential consumer use in our day-to-day lives outside of work are definitely more stringent or harder to meet. And if you're designing an electronic device and it meets those for the consumer or residential type use cases, then you'll most likely be able to also get that approved for Class A, which has requirements that are generally easier to meet. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, great. So going down one more level, let's break it down to Part 15B specifically. So we talked about Title 47, we talked about Part 15 and the type of devices. Now, what specifically is FCC Part 15B?
Okay, so under FCC Part 15, there are also different subparts. So you have subpart A, subpart B, subpart C, and so on. So basically, the ones that we deal with in EMI, EMC industries the most is your subpart B and subpart C. Subpart B is, as I mentioned before, is your unintentional devices, and subpart C is your intentional devices. And what that means is, for subpart C or like 15C, they're your intentional radios. They have radios in there that are built to make sure that you're actually getting that frequency that you're wanting. And however, with part 15B, you don't have a radio in there, but you do have electronics that radiate noise that's coming off the device, and you don't want that unwanted noise to just come from anywhere. So that's why they have to be regulated and maintained.
Okay, so any RF device produces RF radiation and it can possibly interfere with other devices. So it sounds like the purpose of Part 15B is to ensure that all electronic devices are able to kind of coexist with each other in the world. And my device has the right to kind of work on its own, how we intend it to function, and so does yours, and vice versa. Does that sound like a good way to kind of summarize that?
That is a very good way to summarize that.
Okay, great. So virtually all electronics produce some amount of this RF or radio frequency radiation. So if you want your product to succeed, you'll need to be sure that it complies with these Part 15B regulations, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So continuing on that, Part 15B under Title 47 is very expansive, and this gets a little bit more granular. The radio frequency waves need to stay within certain safe, approved levels to avoid creating hazardous EMI. And it sounds like this is the main purpose of Part 15B. Can you talk a little bit more about, 15B itself? Is it mostly for low frequency? Is it high frequency? Is it all of the above? Tell me a little bit more about the B subpart specifically.
All right. So B subpart it's all frequency ranges, I would say. So currently 15B, the FCC regulates that any devices that has a let's say a crystal, right, radio crystal, or sorry, a electronic. What that is, electronic component, right?
Okay.
That generates noise above 9 kilohertz or is meant to, that they be tested under FCC Part 15B. So it ranges from any from low frequency to high frequency. So it used to be from 9K to 9 kilohertz to 40 gigahertz, and now the
Mhm.
FCC expanded that to 256 gigahertz, and they will soon be expanding that. So it's anything low frequency and high frequency, and we're getting more high frequency devices, and we need to make sure that even those higher frequency devices are also regulated and maintained.
Great. And I know we're seeing that in the lab a lot more too at the higher frequencies. So that's a good
Yes.
point. All right. So why is it important to follow Part 15B if you're an electronic device manufacturer, AZ?
All right. So if you're like me, who works in the electronic or mechanical field, right, you likely understand the importance of EMI and to make sure that EMI is maintained. However, if you're not part of this field, your civil engineers, industrial engineers, or even your non-engineers, you still need to make sure you understand what exposure to EMI means. So, and EMI is also about safety too. Like for example, like I've been on planes a lot. I've flown a lot. So when I go on planes, I'm on my devices and I see other people on their devices. Well, as we talked before, with Class A and Class B devices, right? They're within a certain defined, area, a certain defined distance, where you're within like feet or meters of each other for your regular residential and commercial. However, let's say you're on a flight now, you're packed with people. Now you're within inches, probably a feet within each other, and there's so many electronic devices that are on there. I mean, and even multiple electronic devices just from one person or even from one family. So, and that's got to be, maintained as well. So your device doesn't interfere with anybody else's devices there. But not just that. What about the pilots, right? They're using like high sensitive devices, what they're using. So like your radar control that they're using to make sure that they can fly the plane. That's a high sensitive device. And something that's coming out of your cell phone or your tablet that could interfere with the radar. And we want to make sure that those devices are tested properly. And a lot of those devices don't interfere with the radar because that could be really an issue of life or death as well. And that's why we have these Part 15 B regulations.
Wow, so it's very important. Like you said, it could be life-saving. And I always hear the announcement when we take off and land on a plane to turn off our devices. Now I'm definitely going to pay a lot more attention to that after your story there. Also with first responders and even I know we talked before about being able to make a cell phone call and call 911, even on a consumer and a residential level. This could save a life. And I know during the pandemic when we were testing and certified medical devices and first responder devices here, it really helps give us purpose because of the importance of this. Any life we can save, from a product design standpoint to regulatory testing, it's so worth it. So great
And
point there, AZ.
yes, and you make a good point about the making sure about like more consumer wise as well, not just let's say on your plane, just regular trying to make first responder 911 calls. Let's say you're trying to make a call, right? And you have an elderly parent who has a defibrillator, or elderly parent's friend who has a defibrillator. Well, you might make a call and your call is going like 750 megahertz or cellular signal. Well, what if your friend or your elderly parent's defibrillator is trying to connect somewhere, right? You make a call, you could disconnect your call for a life-threatening emergency, and that can even turn their defibrillator off. You don't want that to happen. So again, that could be just right there at any moment, at any time. So it's good to be aware of that and to know why these devices are meant to be like that, why they're regulated through Part 15B.
Yeah, the importance is there. I know with a lot of startups or sometimes enterprises or mid-market organizations that are even adding new product lines or doing updates to their product lines, they overlook this. And sometimes products get to market without this, but this definitely solidifies why it's so important to go through the process before it hits market.
Hmm. Correct.
All right. Well, thanks for all that information. It was so helpful, and I learned so much about Title 47, Part 15, Class A and Class B devices, and Part 15 or subpart B under Part 15 as well, and the importance and why all the electronic devices that are manufactured need to go through that. People like AZ help this company go and help these devices get to market and save lives. If anybody wants to schedule a call and ask one of our engineers like AZ a question, you can contact us here. We have a Calendly link where you can schedule a meeting with one of our regulatory engineers, and our phone number's there as well. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your time. We hope that this content has been helpful. For more content like this, please visit www.compliancetesting.com. You can follow us on Twitter at @compliance_AZ, or there are some links for our LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram accounts as well. So thank you, AZ, for joining us today, and we wish everybody the best.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.